The sound of the engine sputtering to a halt sent a jolt through Claire's chest. The car lurched to a stop on the desolate stretch of country road, and for a moment, all that could be heard was the soft hum of the engine winding down and the distant call of birds. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the empty road. Claire sighed, gripping the steering wheel, frustration flooding her senses. She had been driving for hours, stuck in the endless open fields and narrow roads of the countryside. The city life seemed like a distant memory now, but what was supposed to be a quiet retreat had turned into a nightmare. The last thing she needed was to be stuck on a road that looked as though it had been abandoned for decades, with no cell service and no sign of civilization for miles. Her car had just given up on her, refusing to start no matter how many times she turned the key. Claire opened the door, the heat from the car hitting her as she stepped out. She looked around, her heart pounding. It was starting to get late, and she had no idea how long it would take to get someone to help. Her eyes darted across the landscape, hoping to see something, a house, a farm, anything. But there was nothing for miles except fields stretching out in every direction. Then she spotted it, a small barn in the distance, barely visible through the tall grass. She felt a flicker of hope. Maybe someone there could help her. She started walking towards the barn, her mind racing with possibilities. Was it a farm? Would the owner be kind enough to help a stranger stranded on the side of the road? She quickened her pace, her feet kicking up dust as she made her way toward the barn. The sky had begun to turn an ominous shade of gray, and the weight of the silence pressed in on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The place felt off like an old forgotten world stuck in time. She hesitated for a moment before pushing open the weathered door of the barn. Inside, the barn was dark, musty, and filled with the smell of hay and old wood. The faint sound of rustling echoed around her as her eyes adjusted to the dim light. Claire stepped further into the barn, trying to shake the unease that had settled in her chest. She had expected to find a farmer or someone working, but the place seemed deserted. Yet, the barn looked well-kept, too well-kept for a place that seemed so remote. Her eyes scanned the interior, but there was no sign of life. She stepped back toward the entrance, ready to turn around and look for another option when a voice echoed from the far corner of the barn. Well, what have we got here?" Claire froze, her heart racing. She turned toward the voice, spotting a tall, broad-shouldered man standing near a stack of hay bales, his arms crossed over his chest. He was dressed in a worn plaid shirt and faded jeans, his boots covered in dust from working in the fields. I'm sorry to bother you," Claire stammered, trying to mask the nervousness creeping into her voice. "My car broke down on the road outside. I was hoping you might be able to help me." The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped forward slowly, his eyes narrowing as he examined her. There was something about his gaze that made her feel uneasy. It wasn't exactly hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. "You've got guts, walking into a stranger's barn like this," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Most people wouldn't come this far." I didn't have much of a choice," Claire said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm just looking for help. My car won't start, and I can't get a signal to call anyone." The man seemed to soften a little, but the tension in his stance didn't completely dissipate. "You're lucky you found me. The nearest town's an hour's drive in the other direction. Looks like your car's a goner, then." Claire nodded, relief and anxiety warring in her chest. "I don't know what to do. I don't even know where I am. It's just me out here, and I don't want to be stranded here alone." The man studied her for a moment longer, and for a second, Claire could have sworn she saw something flicker in his eyes, something unreadable, dangerous even. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. "All right," he said, nodding toward the far side of the barn. "I've got a phone in the house. Come on, let's get you sorted out." Claire followed the man out of the barn, her footsteps hesitant. There was something about this whole situation that didn't sit right with her, but she pushed it aside. He was offering to help, and she was grateful for that. As they made their way to the farmhouse, Claire couldn't help but notice the way the man moved. Quietly, confidently, like someone used to being alone. Someone who wasn't afraid of being left in the middle of nowhere. The farmhouse was old, but it was well maintained. The garden was neat, the windows were clean, and there was a sense of care that couldn't be ignored. But the silence of the place felt strange. There were no animals, no sign of any other people. Just the man, his presence dominating the landscape like he was the only one who mattered out here. "Who are you?" Claire asked before she could stop herself. "I mean, I know you're a farmer, but where are your family?" The man's eyes flicked over to her, and for a second, the tension in his jaw tightened. He opened the door to the farmhouse without answering her question, stepping aside to let her in. "Come inside. I'll get the phone," he said, his tone a little more guarded now. Claire stepped inside, cautiously looking around. The interior was rustic but cozy. There was a fire burning in the hearth, and the room was lit by the warm glow of old-fashioned lamps. It looked like the kind of home that had been built with years of hard work, a place that had seen its fair share of history. As the man turned toward the kitchen, Claire's eyes lingered on a large framed photo hanging on the wall. It showed a woman and two children, smiling, happy together. The family portrait looked old, but there was a sharp sadness in the eyes of the people in the photo. Claire didn't know why, but it sent a chill down her spine. The man returned with the phone, but as he handed it to her, he hesitated. "There's something I should tell you," he said, his voice quieter than before. "You're not the first person to end up here." Claire raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" The man looked at her, his face suddenly stern. "People come out here looking for help, but not everyone leaves. Some of them don't make it." A knot twisted in Claire's stomach. What was he saying? Before she could respond, the man's expression softened, and he handed her the phone. "Just a joke," he said, his tone light now. "Don't take it seriously. Go ahead and make your call. I'll be right here." Claire tried to call for help, but the phone screen flickered. Her stomach churned. Something was wrong. She looked at the man, who was now standing a few feet away, watching her with a quiet intensity. "Something's wrong," she muttered, frustration rising. "I can't get a signal." The man smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's an old phone," he said. "Not much service out here." Claire's nerves were on edge, but she didn't want to jump to conclusions. Still, the feeling that something was very wrong began to grow. She couldn't shake the chill running down her spine. The unease she'd felt the moment she entered the barn was back, but now it was more palpable, more dangerous. Suddenly, Claire's eyes fell on a small, dusty journal on the counter beside her. It looked old, worn, and out of place. Without thinking, she reached for it. When she opened the first page, she froze. The entries were dated years ago. They described a man, someone who had helped stranded travelers, someone who had taken them in, made them comfortable, and then, without fail, they were never heard from again. The last entry was chilling. "Another one is here, just like the others. They'll never leave." Claire's blood ran cold. She looked up at the man, who was still standing there, watching her closely. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaking. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, his smile deepened. "You don't know, do you?" A chill ran through Claire as she backed away, the journal still in her hands. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but it was too late. The door slammed shut behind her. Claire's mind raced as she stared at the man. No, the monster, who had been hiding behind the facade of kindness. Her hands trembled as she clutched the journal in her grasp. The words, so innocently written at first, now felt like a death sentence. "Another one is here, just like the others. They'll never leave." Her breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her hard. The man took a step forward, his smile never fading. "You should have listened when I told you to go inside," he said softly, almost as if talking to a child who had misbehaved. "But it's too late now. You've seen too much." Claire's heart pounded in her chest. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to get out of there, but her feet were frozen to the floor. The door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing through the quiet farmhouse. The silence that followed was suffocating. Her gaze darted around the room, searching for any means of escape, but the windows were sealed tight, and the only way out was through the man blocking her path. "Why are you doing this?" Claire whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why?" The man's expression softened just a fraction, as if he was considering her question, but then his smile returned, cold, unfeeling. "It's not about what I want. It's about what has to be done." There are rules, you see. And once you've come this far, you're a part of this place now. It's just how it works. Claire's stomach twisted in fear. The journal's words, "They'll never leave," haunted her. She wasn't going to be the next one to disappear. She couldn't let herself become just another forgotten soul in this forsaken place. But how could she fight against a man who seemed to have control over everything here? How could she escape when every path led to him? You're insane. Claire spat, her fear boiling into anger. You think you could just trap people here? I won't let you. The man's gaze sharpened, and his smile twisted into something darker. You don't have a choice. The only way out is death, or becoming one of us. The words hit Claire like a punch to the gut. Becoming one of us. She knew then that the man wasn't just talking about letting her go. He was talking about turning her into something else. Something twisted, something wrong. She had seen the way he looked at her, the way he had studied her when she first entered his barn. It wasn't just curiosity. He had been sizing her up, deciding her fate. Claire felt her throat tighten. I won't be like the others. I won't stay here with you. Without thinking, she hurled the journal at him, the weight of her fear and fury making her act on pure instinct. But the man simply stepped back, his expression unchanged as the journal flew past him. He wasn't fazed by her outburst. He had long since stopped seeing people like Claire as anything more than pawns in a twisted game. Why fight it, Claire? He said softly, stepping closer to her. You've seen how it goes. You're going to stay here. You'll live here for as long as you can stand it. And when you break, I'll turn you. It's inevitable. Everyone does. Her breath was ragged now, her chest rising and falling in panic. She wanted to scream, to fight, but what could she do against someone who had the power to control this place, this nightmare? Let me go, she begged, her voice cracking with desperation. Please, I don't want to be here. Just let me leave. The man shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. It's already too late for that. You should have stayed away. But now, you're just like the others, lost in the dark. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught Claire's eye. She whipped her head toward the window, her heart leaping in her chest. A car. For the briefest moment, she saw headlights in the distance, just a glimmer of hope, a lifeline. Someone else was out there. Someone else who could help her. Claire's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't wait another moment. She had to act, and she had to act fast. Without another word, Claire bolted toward the back door. She knew it was risky, but she had to try. She had seen the man's twisted obsession, and she wasn't about to let him make her another casualty in his cruel game. She yanked at the door, her hands shaking as she tried to push it open. It was stuck. No, no, no. She pulled harder, using every ounce of strength left in her. She wasn't going to let him take her without a fight. The door creaked open just enough for her to squeeze through, and she pushed her way out into the night air, gasping for breath. Her legs were shaky, but the sight of the headlights, so close now, gave her the energy to run. She sprinted toward the car, hearing footsteps behind her, loud, fast. The man was coming after her. Help! Help! Claire screamed, her voice raw with fear and desperation. The car was just a few feet away now. The headlights illuminated the gravel road, and she saw the driver, just a shadow in the driver's seat. The man behind her laughed a low, mocking sound. It's too late, Claire. They won't help you. But Claire didn't stop. She was almost there. The car door opened, and Claire hurled herself inside, slamming it shut just as the man reached her. Drive! She screamed at the driver. The man's face twisted with rage as he pounded on the window. But the driver, a stranger with a look of confusion and concern, didn't hesitate. He slammed his foot on the gas, and they sped off, leaving the farmhouse and the man behind. Claire collapsed back in the seat, her chest heaving with exhaustion. She looked back, half expecting to see the man chasing them. But there was nothing but the empty road stretching out behind them. I don't know who you are, the driver said, glancing over at her with a look of disbelief. But you were running from something serious. Are you all right? Claire looked out the window, her mind racing. She didn't know how to explain what had just happened, what she had just escaped. The fear, the terror, the darkness that had been closing in on her. It was all still fresh in her mind. But for the first time in hours, she felt safe. She was free. I don't know, she whispered, her voice shaky. But I don't think I'll ever be the same. The car sped down the road, leaving the farmhouse behind. Claire's breathing began to slow, and her body, still trembling, started to relax. She glanced over at the driver, who was looking at her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "What happened back there?" he asked. "Who was that guy?" Claire swallowed hard, trying to collect herself. "I don't know his name," she said, her voice shaky. "But he's been trapping people out there. He's not just some ordinary farmer. He's something else. He's been taking people in, and they never leave. He tried to do the same to me. I think I was just another victim." The driver looked at her in disbelief, his eyes widening. "That's crazy. You're lucky you got away. People don't come back from those kinds of places. Not without something changing them." "I don't know what he wanted," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not going back there. Not ever. Not if it means becoming like the others. I won't let him do that to me." The car continued down the road, Claire's mind still spinning with everything that had happened. It felt like a nightmare, one she had barely escaped. But as she looked at the man in the driver's seat, she realized something. She had survived, and no matter what came next, she would never let herself become another lost soul in that forsaken place.